plan our database, we need to have a look at the data and then put it into something called third normal form. This involves having linked tables where in each table, our first column is a unique ID, and then we have additional columns where we need to say what the column name is, the data type, and how many characters are needed. Putting data into third normal form is relatively simple. Your first step would be to add an additional ID column, and then we're looking for columns where we've got text that's been repeated. So if I look at column A, whilst we've got text, none of these words are duplicates. Likewise, in our meaning and example usage, we don't have any duplicate entries. Compare this with the language. We've got lots of repeated languages, and in our sentiment column, we've only got 3 values: positive, negative, and neutral. To put this data into third normal form, we're going to take our language and sentiment columns and replace them with ID numbers that link them to a language and sentiment table. Here's the database plan for the untranslatable data. We've got 3 linked tables and maybe a 4th fun facts table that's off to the side as a nice to have for later on. My main table, my untranslatables, has got an ID, which is a primary key that's going to be auto-incremented. It's got the meaning column, a language ID, a sentiment ID, and an example ID. You'll notice that anything that is an integer is labeled as such, and anything that's text right now is variable character, and that is capped at 255 characters. If you had a longer piece of text, you need to change that data type from varchar to text. For my language table, the first column is language ID, and then I've got the language. And I looked at the lengths of all the languages, and the longest language was about 25 characters. So I've set the maximum length for any language to be 50 characters. For my sentiments, I only had 3 sentiments, and the longest was 8 characters long, which is why my sentiment column only needs to be variable characters 8, and of course we do need a primary key. If you provide your teacher with a structure similar to what you see on your screen, they will be able to provide you with CSV files which contain each of those tables. So now if we look at my untranslatable data, you can see I've got my primary ID, I've got my word, meaning, and example still as text, but I've got a column called language ID and sentiment ID, which simply have numbers. And then I've got a separate CSV for my languages, which has the language ID, and those numbers match what's in my language ID column, and they correspond to specific languages. I also have a really simple sentiment CSV, which only has those 3 entries. As this video is getting a little bit long, I'll show you how you can set up your database in the next video.